Today we're tackling one of the biggest, and I'd say maybe one of the most expensive misunderstandings in modern finance. When Bitcoin first showed up, the story was pretty simple, right? Untraceable, anonymous digital cash. But the reality, well, the reality is proven by a decade of forensic analysis is profoundly different.
It really is the central contradiction of the technology, isn't it? The very same transparent ledger that gives you that trustless guarantee. It's also a permanent public surveillance system. Bitcoin was, never actually anonymous. It was only pseudonymous. And the real challenge for analysts has been translating those long strings of cryptographic addresses, the pseudonyms, into actual real-world identities.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We've pulled together sources that cover everything from user perception to the blockchain architecture itself and the high-stakes technological arms race between tracing companies and privacy advocates. We're going to give you the ultimate shortcut to understanding how researchers and, yes, law enforcement shatter that pseudonymity.
Yeah, we'll cover it all. We'll start with the fundamental structure of an irreversible transaction. You could call it the foundational flaw, if you will. Then we'll get into the advanced toolkit, the behavioral heuristics and network layer attacks they use to unmask users. And finally, we'll dive really deep into the next generation of defenses, showing what it actually takes to maintain privacy today.
Okay, so let's unpack the human element first.
Yeah.
If privacy is this difficult to achieve, do the people who are actually using Bitcoin even understand the risk? We looked at a survey of 125 active Bitcoin users and the findings. Well, they suggest there's a massive gap between perception and reality.
It's a classic case, really, a kind of cognitive dissonance that's been driven by those initial marketing narratives. The study found that a remarkable 7 out of 10 active users, that's 70%, still associated a medium or even a high level of anonymity with the Bitcoin network. And, based on that confidence, most of them reported that their overall concerns about anonymity were low or medium.
That 70% figure is just startling to me, especially when you think about how common it is now to hear about these major tracing firms working with global government agencies. It just shows you the power of that early narrative, that digital cash untraceable idea really stuck.
It truly did. I think people confuse the absence of a required name at the point of transaction with the permanent invisibility of the transaction itself. But here's the interesting paradox in the data. Despite that broad confidence, you can see anxiety is clearly creeping in for a sizable minority.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. The data on potential abandonment is a massive red flag. Even with general confidence being so high, almost 1/5, that's nearly 20% of active users, said they had already considered abandoning Bitcoin entirely. And it was specifically because they were worried about their anonymity being compromised. That's a huge percentage of potential user churn.
Right. And just think about the implication for network adoption. If 1 in 5 of your current users is thinking of leaving because they don't trust the privacy level, well, that really compromises the growth trajectory. It tells you this isn't just some niche technical concern, it's a fundamental hurdle for mainstream acceptance.
So if they're concerned enough to think about leaving, did they understand the mechanism of the risk? I mean, did they know they were vulnerable to these technical attacks we're going to talk about?
And that's where the awareness gap really becomes apparent. When they were asked about the general risk of de-anonymizing the public blockchain, 35% of the participants were aware the risk existed but were simply not concerned. They knew the possibility was theoretical, but they didn't feel it applied to them. Maybe they thought, I'm not important enough to be targeted, or they just misunderstood how easy mass tracing can be.
And that contrasts so sharply with the nearly 50% who are actively concerned about the risk of de-anonymizing the blockchain in some way. It feels like the community is split. It's like you have those who are willfully ignorant or maybe overconfident, and then you have those who are genuinely afraid of the technological reality.
Absolutely. I think the takeaway for developers in the community is twofold. First, they have to dramatically increase privacy awareness, making sure users understand that the default settings are, frankly, unsafe. And second, and this is more important, they have to improve the actual level of anonymity the network provides. Because as long as this information gap is driving users away, the system faces a kind of existential adoption crisis. Privacy needs to be built into the tools, not treated as some optional high-difficulty setting for advanced users only.
Okay, to really grasp how analysts break privacy, we have to start at the source. What is the fundamental structure of a Bitcoin transaction, and why does this structure pretty much guarantee public traceability?
The answer really lies in the blockchain being an append-only ledger. It's a globally distributed, permanent, unchangeable record. This public transparency is, you could say, the necessary evil. It's what allows the system to guarantee that no one can double spend their money without relying on a bank. You just can't have trustless consensus without perfect visibility.
Okay, before we walk through a payment, we need to introduce a key technical concept that is absolutely crucial to tracing, the Unspent Transaction Output, or UTXO. If you don't get the UTXO model, you just won't understand why tracing works so well.
That's a great point, a really great point. Bitcoin doesn't use account balances the way a bank does. Instead, your wallet is just a collection of these UTXOs. Think of them as digital bills or coins of varying amounts left over from previous transactions. So when you want to spend, say, zero point 0.7 BTC, you are not debiting an account. You're selecting and consuming one or more of these specific, distinct digital bills that equal or exceed zero point 0.7 BTC. And once it's consumed, that UTXO is gone forever. New UTXOs are created as outputs.
Right. So if I have a 1.0 BTC UTXO from a previous transaction, and I want to spend 0.7 BTC, I have to use that entire 1.0 BTC UTXO as my input. Is that right?
Precisely. You must spend the full amount. This is the crucial design element we'll come back to again and again. You select the 1.0 BTC UTXO as your input, you send 0.7 BTC to the merchant, and the remaining 0.3 BTC is immediately returned to you as a brand new UTXO at a new address. That's the change address. That simple need to spend the entire input is what generates these highly predictable behavioral patterns that analysts can exploit.
Okay, let's keep that UTXO concept in mind as we walk through a simple payment. Let's say sending 0.7 BTC to a merchant.
Step 1. The merchant wants to get paid. They generate a receiving address, their public key, or MPay, and they send it to you. This address is basically the lockbox for the new 0.7 BTC UTXO you are creating for them.
Okay, so step 2. I'm the user. I need to gather the correct UTXOs that add up to at least 0.7 BTC.
Right. You form the transaction, the TX. This transaction explicitly states which specific previously existing UTXOs you are consuming. Those are the inputs. And which new UTXOs are being created. Those are the outputs. So the 0.7 BTC for the merchant, the MPK, and then whatever is left over is change for you. Step 3 is signing. You digitally sign this transaction using your private key to cryptographically prove you own the inputs you're trying to spend.
And that signature proves I own the money, and then the transaction gets broadcast out.
Correct. Step 4. The transaction floods the network, and the miners pick it up. In Step 5, the miners incorporate that TX into a valid block, verifying all the signatures and the inputs. Finally, Step 6, the block is broadcast and confirmed, and the merchant now officially owns a new UTXO of 0.7 BPC at their address.
And the essential privacy risk here is that every single one of those details, the exact UTXOs consumed, the exact amounts, the source addresses, and the destination addresses, is permanently recorded and linked together forever.
That's the public linkage. The system's only real defense is the initial separation between the cryptographic address and the real-world person. But the moment just one address, let's say the merchant's address, which is later tied to a KYC-compliant exchange, is known, well, their entire history and any address that's been clustered with it is compromised. That UTXO structure linking consumption and creation of funds, it's the perfect paper trail.
All right, we've established the blockchain is a transparent record of all activity, and the UTXO model is the building block. Now we move to the analysts at firms like Chainalysis and Elliptic. They need to somehow convert millions of these disconnected addresses into groups that are controlled by single entities. How on earth do they do that?
They use heuristics. These are basically high-probability educated guesses. They're based on the predictable behavior of automated wallet software and the limitations of the Bitcoin protocol itself. They exploit the fact that people, when they interact with code, they generate measurable, repeatable patterns.
Let's start with the big one then. The cornerstone of pretty much all blockchain forensics. The Common Input Ownership Heuristic, or CIOH.
The CIOH is just so foundational because of that UTXO model we just talked about. Its rule is simple. If a single transaction consumes multiple UTXOs, multiple inputs, then all of those UTXOs must be controlled by the same private key, which means they all belong to the same entity.
Why is that assumption so incredibly strong? I mean, why is it so reliable?
Because the network requires that digital signature proving ownership for every single input that's consumed. It's just highly, highly improbable that multiple unrelated people would all simultaneously agree to consume their separate UTXOs in one single transaction, only to send the resulting output to some third party. If you need 1.0 BTC, but your funds are scattered across 3 different addresses, say zero point 0.4, zero point 0.4, and zero point 0.2 BTC, you have to select all 3. By signing off on that single transaction, you prove that one person or one entity controls all 3 of those source addresses.
So every single time a user consolidates their scattered funds to make a payment, they are unknowingly clustering their own addresses for the entire world to see.
Exactly. This heuristic is so powerful that, if you ignore the few countermeasures designed to break it, like mixing services, its accuracy in clustering addresses controlled by the same wallet entity is near 100%. This is the single biggest weapon in the analyst's arsenal. It lets them turn a few known addresses into these vast clusters that contain millions of previously pseudonymous addresses.
Okay, let's move to heuristic B, change address detection. This one is also a direct product of that UTXO structure. We know that if I spend a 1.0 BTC input to send 0.7 BTC, the remaining 0.3 BTC has to come back to me. But how do analysts know which output is the payment and which one is the change?
It's actually highly challenging because, both outputs look identical on the surface. They are just new UTXOs going to new public keys. So analysts have to rely on this complex logic to guess the change address because identifying it means they have instantly clustered the original pair with a brand new, previously unseen address.
So what is the logic? How do they distinguish the change address from the actual payment recipient?
Well, analysts look for a set of conditions that strongly imply ownership by the sender. For example, one refined detection method focuses on the newness of the address. They look for an output address that meets 4 key criteria at the same time. First, it has not appeared anywhere previously on the blockchain. This suggests it's a freshly generated address that the sender's wallet created just for change.
Right, makes sense. It's a one-time use address.
Second, the transaction itself is not a coin generation, so it's not a miner creating new coins. Third, they check that the input address is not the same as the change address, which eliminates that common self-change scenario. And fourth, and this is the crucial part, they verify that all other outputs in that same transaction have appeared previously. So if the payment destination is an address that has been seen before, like a known exchange deposit address, but one other output is brand new, it strongly suggests the new one is the change.
That is highly technical, and for good reason you want high certainty. But you mentioned that even sophisticated algorithms for this had a high false positive rate.
Yes. Attempts to automate this detection have, in some cases, yielded very high false positive rates, up to 13% in certain research. And in a system that's dealing with millions of transactions, a 13% error rate is massive. It means investigators might incorrectly attribute millions of dollars and potentially implicate innocent parties. It really highlights the inherent uncertainty when you're relying on these behavioral assumptions rather than, cryptographic proof.
Finally, let's discuss heuristic C wallet fingerprinting. This moves beyond the flow of money and into the subtle clues left by the software itself.
This is truly forensic work. It's fascinating. Analysts can deduce the type of wallet software being used, whether it's a mobile app, a specialized online service, or the standard Bitcoin core, just by observing tiny variations in transaction construction. Different wallets implement standards differently, and that creates these unique detectable footprints.
What specific technical variables are they looking at? What are the clues?
They examine differences in address formats, which can instantly categorize transactions. They look at script types, especially multi-sig schemes. They also look at implementation details of standards like BIP69, which governs the lexicographical indexing or the specific ordering of inputs and outputs. Wallets that strictly implement BIP69 create a very ordered pattern, whereas those that don't often use arbitrary or time-based ordering, creating a totally distinct fingerprint.
And the most incredible example of this subtle fingerprinting is tied to an optimization effort, just to save a single byte.
The low R signature example is the perfect illustration of how deeply analysts can dig. Bitcoin Core, to save space, was optimized to only generate signatures with a low R value, which saves, on average, 1 byte per transaction. This microscopic optimization created a massive fingerprint. By monitoring transactions, analysts could say, if this transaction has a high R signature, it cannot have been signed by the standard Bitcoin Core wallet during this period. They literally weaponize optimization efforts.
And we also need to mention the consumer heuristic, which is a bit simpler. It's just looking at the number of outputs.
Yeah, that's how they differentiate a retail user from an industrial user. An individual user, like you or me, typically generates transactions with 2 outputs, the payment and the change. But large, high-volume services exchanges, mining pools, gambling sites, they use consolidation and batching. They often aggregate dozens of inputs to fund transactions with dozens or even hundreds of outputs. This instantly flags the transaction as belonging to a major service provider, making them a high-value target for further clustering.
We've established that the transaction graph is not private, but the ledger only provides pseudonyms. So the next step in de-anonymization is linking those pseudonyms to real-world network data, specifically the IP address, which can expose location and ownership.
This is where analysts move from on-chain forensics to active network surveillance, sometimes called communication eavesdropping. Although the P2P network is designed to be highly dynamic, which makes traffic analysis difficult, monitoring clients can successfully identify the user who initiated a transaction by binding that transaction to the IP address where it was first created.
How does that actually work? I mean, if I broadcast a transaction, it instantly floods the network. How can you possibly tell if the first node that sent it to you is the real source or just a really speedy relay?
They use a Bayesian probabilistic model that focuses on timing. So monitoring clients connects to many, many nodes all across the network. When a transaction message starts flying out, the monitor notes which connected client relays that transaction first within a specific tiny time segment. Since data takes time to travel, the node that reports the transaction earliest has the highest probability of being the originator, or at least physically closest to the originator.
And they can improve the certainty of their guess by looking at multiple data points, I assume.
Exactly. They combine evidence using a naive Bayes classifier. So if one user over the course of a week sends 10 transactions and 8 of those transactions are reported first by the same specific IP address, well, combining those probabilities across all 10 instances yields a highly decisive result on the most likely originator IP address.
And once that IP address is identified, how reliable is the geographic localization?
It's surprisingly effective for large-scale analysis. Analysts use publicly available databases like MaxMind to determine the approximate physical location of the IP addresses. This lets them conduct macro-level analysis of Bitcoin distribution and cash flow. The data consistently shows that identified Bitcoin clients are overwhelmingly located in developed Western regions, which is useful information for regulatory and geopolitical intelligence. Of course, this relies on users not using countermeasures like VPNs or Tor, but for the majority of users, this localization is quite effective.
Moving back to on-chain manipulation for a second, let's talk about forced address reuse. This sounds like an explicit, targeted attack that's designed to generate clustering data on purpose.
It is. It's a coercive technique designed to weaponize the CIOH. Imagine an adversary identifies an old address you used just once on the blockchain. They send a tiny amount, a dust payment, maybe 1 cent's worth to that address. They are hoping that your automated wallet software, when it's trying to make a larger payment later, will automatically combine that little dust UTXO with your other genuine UTXOs to cover the transaction fee or the required amount.
And the moment my wallet combines that unwanted dust input with my other funds.
Bingo. The Common Input Ownership Heuristic is activated. The adversary has now forced your wallet to link that old targeted address with any new change address and any other inputs used in that larger transaction. It's a targeted way of forcing the victim to reveal new privacy-relevant links between their previously separated addresses.
And finally, we should probably touch on the security risks of having these exposed IP addresses beyond just the privacy compromise.
Oh, absolutely. The risks extend to the entire network stability. If a validator or a miner's IP address is revealed, either through that first-scene analysis or via side channels and timing attacks, where subtle differences in network latency or behavior reveal information, it makes them a target for a distributed denial of service, a DDoS attack. This ability to target key network participants actually compromises the consensus mechanism. This is a recognized security threat in both Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it proves that node exposure is not just a privacy issue, but a critical decentralization and resilience issue as well.
The moment the industry realized anonymity was a lie, I think, often traces back to one specific academic study. Let's start with the pioneering work of Sarah Meiklejohn. Why was her research so seismic in redefining Bitcoin's capabilities?
Meiklejohn's work, which started around 2013, was really the moment the myth of untraceable digital cash was officially busted. Until then, most transactions just looked random, like noise. She created the initial ground truth data set that made sense of all that chaos. She manually engaged in hundreds of transactions. She set up deposit accounts, transacted with exchanges like Mt. Gox, sent coins to mining pools, and interacted with specific known entities, including, yes, illicit vendors like the original Silk Road.
So she had a few hundred known tags. How did those tags then lead to this explosion of identified activity?
Well, she used her tagged addresses as seeds, and then she applied the clustering heuristics, primarily the CIOH, across the entire historical transaction graph. So if one known Silk Road deposit address was found in a cluster with 50,000 other addresses, the entire group of 50,000 was tentatively clustered as belonging to the same entity, the Silk Road hot wallet. This chaining method allowed her few hundred manual tags to just explode into clusters, identifying over 1 million pseudonymous addresses.
Wow. That's the power of scale using predictable behavior to aggregate data.
Precisely. It proved that the transaction graph was not random at all, but highly structured and navigable. Her work fundamentally initiated a new era of commercial and governmental cryptocurrency tracing.
Let's move to a more modern, high-profile example. Ransomware fund tracing. This is critical for quantifying the impact of cybercrime.
This usually starts with an initial identification phase, just getting the ransomware wallet addresses. They get them either from victim reports or by reverse engineering the malware binaries themselves. Once they have an address, analysts follow the money as it consolidates. They often perform what they call mystery shopper payments, sending a tiny unique amount, like 0.0001 BTC, to the ransomware address, and then just watching where that specific UTXO moves.
So they're essentially tracking the money as the criminals attempt to cash out or wash the funds.
Yes, and they rely heavily on the CIOH to track that consolidation. They look for transactions where small ransom payments are aggregated into larger wallets, which typically belong to an intermediary or a mixer. The analysis found some key successes, notably identifying the now-defunct BTCE exchange as a major exit point for many cybercrime operations because of its extremely lax KYC and AML controls.
But the analysis also revealed the limits of tracing, especially when criminals are careful.
It showed a very stark reality. While analysts could track funds leaving the network through identifiable exchanges, the vast majority of money often just vanished. For major ransomware groups like WannaCry and CryptoXXX, analysis showed that 100% of WannaCry funds and 95% of CryptoXXX funds were sent to destinations that were just labeled unknown. This confirms that advanced operational security, or even just holding the coins, can render tracing ineffective in many of these high-stakes cases.
Okay, a crucial case that really demonstrated the fallibility of the CIOH was the forensic analysis of the defunct Mt. Gox exchange.
The Mt. Gox investigation was a prime example of data fusion. They were combining public blockchain data with external leaked information. Specifically, an internal database from the exchange and also public forum posts from users detailing their missing deposits. This fusion confirmed that Mt. Gox had been insolvent for years because of massive, multiple thefts.
But this aggregation also proved the heuristic was not infallible.
That's the crucial caveat. The cluster associated with Mt. Gox, the Mt. Gox and others cluster, it ballooned to 8.6 million transactions and 3.6 million addresses. The problem was twofold. First, Mt. Gox had this unique import private key feature, which let users deposit coins directly from their self-custody wallets into the exchange's control, and that confused the clustering algorithm. And second, and most critically, the cluster accidentally aggregated legitimate CoinJoin transactions.
Right, and since CoinJoin is specifically designed to break the CIOH by merging inputs from unrelated users, aggregating them into the Mt. Gox cluster led to these incorrect and massively exaggerated figures of the exchange's activity.
Exactly. The assumption of common ownership was fundamentally violated by CoinJoin. This led to just nonsensical conclusions, like the claim that certain donation sites were generating hundreds of millions of dollars a day by directing deposits straight to the exchange. It was a massive learning moment for the industry. You cannot simply assume CIOH accuracy without accounting for these privacy-enhancing technologies.
Finally, let's bring this into the current legal landscape. How is the transparency of the blockchain impacting courtrooms today?
On-chain data is now routinely accepted as evidence in financial crime investigations all over the world. Courts rely on expert testimony that uses proprietary analysis software, tracing illicit flows, and attributing funds. The immutability of the public ledger, the fact that the raw data can be reproduced by anyone, lends a high degree of integrity to the initial evidence.
But there's intense legal friction regarding the black box nature of this proprietary tracing software.
That's right. When a firm like Chainalysis presents a result, these funds move to this cluster. They are relying on proprietary trade secret algorithms to do the clustering and tagging. Defense attorneys challenge the reliability of these black box methodologies because they can't be fully audited or examined by the defense. Legal systems are still grappling with the requirement to preserve the chain of custody for these derived data sets and ensuring that the convenience of automated analytics doesn't bypass foundational reliability and due process concerns.
Given the effectiveness of the tracing techniques we've covered, Privacy is clearly a proactive task. It's not a default setting. So let's look at the arms race now. What are the defensive techniques available, starting with maybe the most basic, non-technical step?
The consensus among privacy experts is surprisingly simple. Avoiding anti-money laundering, AML, and Know Your Customer, KYC, compliance at centralized exchanges is the single most effective step you can take. If an adversary can't link your real-world legal identity to the initial address where your funds entered the system, they have no initial anchor to start their tracing. No technology works better than preventing that link in the first place.
So if I want to acquire coins anonymously, I need to use methods that don't require me to show an ID.
Correct. Anonymous acquisition methods include using cash trades via peer-to-peer services, engaging in solo mining if you have the resources, or using cash substitutes like prepaid debit cards or gift cards that you purchase with cash and then traded online for Bitcoin. The goal is complete identity separation from the cryptographic address from day one.
Now we move to the technology that was explicitly designed to defeat the Common Input Ownership Heuristic, coin join or mixing. How does it fundamentally work to achieve that deniability?
CoinJoin works by aggregating a transaction from multiple users into a single massive transaction. So imagine 10 people pooling their UTXOs as inputs into one transaction. That transaction then has 10 or more outputs going to new addresses. Since the CIOH assumes one owner controls all the inputs, CoinJoin breaks that assumption by guaranteeing that the inputs belong to multiple unrelated owners. It completely obscures the link between the initial inputs and the final outputs. When it's done correctly, the result is that everyone walks away with new UTXOs that are indistinguishable from each other.
That sounds like a perfect defense. But we touched on this weakness earlier, the cookie monster problem.
That weakness, which is formally known as coin aggregation, is systemic. The problem arises when a user needs to make a large subsequent payment. To do that, they often combine UTXOs that were generated from several different previous CoinJoin transactions into one single post-mix transaction. This aggregation drawing inputs from multiple mixed batches creates a new, highly revealing link on the blockchain.
And the moment I combine those previously separated inputs, I've basically undone all the hard work of the mixers.
You have. This act is the fuel for what are called cluster intersection attacks. By observing this post-mix aggregation, analysts can deduce that all the inputs, even those coming from different mixing rounds, must belong to the same entity. This flaw affects more than 10% of post-CoinJoin transactions, and it significantly undermines the long-term effectiveness of first-generation mixing. Developers are now working to educate users to rigorously separate their coins and avoid this kind of accidental aggregation.
So what are the promising second-generation countermeasures that actively fix the CIOH problem without that aggregation risk?
The two big ones are pay-join and silent payments. Pay-join, or pay-to-endpoint, P2EP, is brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of the payer being the only one providing inputs, the payee also contributes one of their own UTXOs as an input to the transaction.
So the transaction inputs are guaranteed to belong to at least two different people, the payer and the payee.
Exactly. This fundamentally voids the CIOH because that assumption of single ownership is broken by design. And the best part, pay-join transactions are non-detectable. They look identical to a standard consolidation transaction on the blockchain. If pay-join adoption became universal, the CIOH, the primary tracing tool, would be invalidated across large parts of the network.
And silent payments tackle the problem of address reuse, which is always a risk, particularly for merchants or people receiving donations.
Silent payments, using the Taproot standard, is a huge leap forward. Taproot is an upgrade that improves privacy and efficiency, particularly for complex transactions. And silent payments allow a recipient to publish a single reusable off-chain address. However, for every transaction, this reusable address automatically generates a unique one-time Taproot address using cryptographic key generation.
So every single payment I receive goes to a brand new address that no one else can link back to my static public address.
That's the genius of it. It's non-interactive, detectable only by the sender and the receiver, and it prevents analysts from inferring relationships between transactions. It offers exceptional privacy without the scalability drawbacks that are associated with adding extra data to the transaction block.
Speaking scalability, let's look at Layer 2 technology. What is the Lightning Network doing for privacy?
The Lightning Network, or LN, significantly improves privacy for small, frequent payments, primarily through onion routing. Think of it like a series of nested envelopes. When I send a payment across the LN, the payment is routed through a chain of intermediate nodes. Each node only knows who sent them the payment, their predecessor, and who they must send it to next, their successor. They never know the ultimate source or the final destination of the payment.
So the route is obscured by cryptography, but the channels themselves still have to interact with the public blockchain to open and close. Right.
They do. Channels open and close as visible multi-sig transactions on the public ledger, which can reveal network topology. Plus, routing nodes expose their IP addresses unless they are run over something like Tor. To combat this, proposals like rendezvous routing are being designed to help hide the destination node's identity even from the sender, which enhances deniability even further.
We have to address the final tension point here. Privacy costs resources.
This is critical. Privacy is not free. Many robust privacy solutions, whether it's adding complex data for coin-join coordination or using resource-intensive client-side filtering for private wallet synchronization, consume precious block space. This increases miner fees and it degrades overall scalability. During periods of peak network demand, like the bull run of 2017, resource-costly privacy techniques can become prohibitively expensive, forcing users back toward cheaper, less private default transactions. The privacy arms race is also a race for efficiency.
Given that Bitcoin's transparency is kind of baked into its core, some projects decided to build from the ground up, prioritizing privacy above everything else. Let's look at some alternative approaches, starting with Dash.
Dash's private send feature is an example of an automated mix-in service that simplified the coin join process for users. It requires users to mix only using fixed denominations, so 0.01, 0.1, or 10 DASH. While that was convenient, this approach proved to be highly vulnerable.
Why did those fixed denominations create a problem?
Because it made the coin aggregation problem, that cookie monster attack, easier to execute. Since all the mixed coins came in standardized sizes, when a user later aggregated those standardized UTXOs to make a large, unique payment, it created a highly predictable on-chain pattern. Empirical analysis showed that over 40% of the private transactions could be successfully de-anonymized because of these design choices. It was a classic case of convenience traded for security.
Next, we have Zcash, which brought an entirely new category of cryptography into this space: zero-knowledge proofs.
Zcash pioneered the use of ZK snarks. That stands for Zero-Knowledge Succinct Non-Interactive Argument of Knowledge. This is a game changer. The concept is that you can prove you know something or that a transaction is valid without revealing the underlying data.
Can you give me a real-world analogy for that complex idea?
Sure. Think of it this way. You want to prove to a bank that your account has $1 million. Traditional banking requires you to show your account statement. A zero-knowledge proof allows you to prove to the bank that your account balance is greater than $1 million without revealing the specific balance, or even the bank where it's held. In the Zcash context, it allows the network to verify that a transaction is valid. Inputs equal outputs. The sender had authority, without revealing the sender's address, the receiver's address, or the amount transferred.
That is true anonymity, then, for shielded Z2Z transactions. But Zcash still has transparent T addresses that look like Bitcoin addresses. Does interacting with those T addresses compromise the shielded pool?
It does. Analysis showed that even Zcash is vulnerable at the borders. When funds moved from a centralized entity like the Shapeshift exchange into the Zcash shielded pool, that interaction created a linkage. A significant flow of ZEC was identified moving in and out of the shielded pool via transactions that could be traced back to that Shapeshift KYC link. It shows that even the most powerful cryptography can't fully protect against interactions with large, regulated, centralized entities.
And finally, Monero, which aims for full anonymity by default.
Monero is built on the philosophy that privacy should be mandatory, not optional. It uses two core technologies to conceal the sender, the receiver, and the amount in every single transaction. First, ring signatures. When you send a transaction, your signature is cryptographically mixed with the signatures of several other users, forming a ring. The network can verify that someone in that ring signed the transaction, but it cannot definitively tell which one, hiding the true sender among a crowd of potential signers.
So it hides the source. How does it hide the amount?
It uses rings confidential transactions, or ring CTs. See, earlier versions of ring signatures still left the transaction amount exposed, which was a major flaw. Ring CTs use cryptographic commitment schemes to conceal the exact amount transferred. The network can mathematically confirm that no new funds were created, and the inputs equal the outputs, but the specific values of those inputs and outputs remain completely hidden from all observers. This combination of hiding the sender and the amount makes Monero, by design, the strongest privacy coin out there. #OutTrackOutro.
So We have completed this deep dive, tracing the entire architecture of Bitcoin from its foundational transparency to the cutting-edge attacks and defenses. And the conclusion is clear. The public ledger is a permanent history book, and anonymity is not a given. It's a constant, resource-intensive struggle.
And that struggle is ultimately about control. If you, the user, want privacy, you have to take active steps, adopting PayJoin, using silent payments, and avoiding those KYC-compliant on-ramps. The transparency of the transaction graph is the battleground, but the outcome of that battle determines the ultimate value of the currency.
You've touched on this connection a few times. Let's make that final connection crystal clear for the listener. Why does this matter beyond the immediate scope of an investigation? Why is privacy intrinsically linked to fungibility?
Because if tracing works too well, it creates friction. If the history of a specific coin, a specific UTXO, can be tracked back to a hack, a ransomware payment, or even just an exchange that lacked proper regulatory controls, that coin may be deemed tainted by major payment processors or regulated entities.
And if my coin is tainted, it's not equal to your coin.
Exactly. If my coin is refused by a merchant or it trades at a discount because of its transaction history, the money has lost its fungibility. It's no longer interchangeable with every other unit of the currency. This allows centralized bodies to impose censorship and to define which money is good and which is bad, and that fundamentally compromises the whole concept of decentralized, trustless cash.
So if the system allows for the tracking and segregation of coins based on their history, the core value proposition of a universal medium of exchange is completely lost.
Precisely. So the final provocative thought for you to consider is this. True fungibility, where every digital dollar is equally accepted regardless of its unique transaction history, is not a cryptographic guarantee in a pseudo-anonymous system. It's a political and technological battle waged on the transaction graph every single day. The question you have to answer is, if the cost of convenience is traceability, are you willing to accept a form of digital money where its past dictates its future value?